Hello, and welcome to Talk Relationship to Me, the show that explores some of the most important relationship topics. I'm Dr. Elana Hoffman. As a clinical psychologist, I focus on all things relationships. From dating to sex to long-term relationships to divorce, I cover it all. I use my professional lens as a psychologist as well as lived experience to cover these topics. Do you need to talk relationships? You're in the right place. On today's episode, I am covering a big topic that lots of clients ask me, generally in reference to their partners, to be honest, which is, can people change? And I will answer this question with my favorite joke that sometimes I tell my clients in answer to this. And that is, how many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? Feel free to pause while you mull this over and come back to it. The answer is 1. But the light bulb has to want to change. Hilarious, right? Okay, but yeah, I mean, this is true. Of course people can change, and the major caveat to that is that that person has to want to change. So, I'm going to talk a little bit today about what kinds of changes are possible, what kinds of changes are inevitable, and how to kind of navigate this. And really, the biggest paradox of all of this is that if you are in the beginnings of a relationship with somebody, or you are considering a long-term relationship with someone, a partnership, engagement, marriage, etc., you really cannot marry somebody expecting that fundamental things about that person will change. And at the same time, what you have to understand is that change over time is completely inevitable. So it is really this difficult paradox because you don't know what the future will hold. Experience changes people, perspective changes people, life events change people. Biology, of course, changes over time. And so change over time, if you are with somebody for decades, it is inevitable. Of course it is. And at the same time, if you are thinking about spending your life with somebody and there is something about them that you really cannot stand and you're thinking, if only this thing would change, then I would be happy, then I encourage you to rethink that notion. There are also windows of time in someone's life and in relationships in particular, when change is possible and happens. One of them is the beginning of a relationship, when you are in new relationship energy and you're kind of, drunk or high on the hormones of love, and you do things that you would not otherwise do. You are open-minded to things that you might not otherwise be open-minded to. And that is an important window of change. And if somebody who you are dating or you're thinking about a future with does not, show that in the beginning of a relationship, does not show willingness to be open-minded or to look at things differently, which is a pretty important predictor of relationship satisfaction, because it means that you are willing to try something that is important to your partner, or think about something differently that is important to your partner. If that doesn't show up in the beginning of the relationship, then that likely won't ever happen. So that's an important window of change. And then the other one is when people are on the brink of breaking up. So of course I do couples therapy, and I see couples who do change, who can change, who are motivated to change because their relationship is on the line and that is motivating to them. So yes, somebody has to want to change, but there are things in their life that make them want to change. And that is different. The distinction is kind of subtle. That is different than somebody bringing their partner to couples therapy saying this person is the problem, they need to change, and the person sort of understanding on their own that the stakes are pretty high and they want to do things differently. And of course, in couples therapy, both people need to change. The dynamic needs to change. They need to understand each other on a deep fundamental level and kind of change the pattern that they are in of dysfunction or toxicity or whatever it is. So, the things that can change over time are perspectives. Some values can change over time. There are interests, of course, can change over time. But there are big personality factors that are pretty stable over time. Those are things like openness to experience. The big 5 personality factors are openness to experience, conscientiousness. If you're a conscientious person, that is likely a stable personality trait. Neuroticism, that is also unlikely to change over time. And these are, some of the big personality things, introversion or extroversion, that is also unlikely to change over time. So, a great example that I see of this in my practice is somebody who is kind of tired of their partner going out all the time and, wanting to party and wanting to go to all the things and do all the things. And this is sort of a mismatch between extroversion and introversion. And they sort of think, well, once we get married and settle down, this person will want to go out less or will want to work less. This is a big one that I see too. And that is not what happens. That's really not what happens. And people will say, well, marriage or having kids makes people change. And that is not necessarily true. Your lifestyle changes and your priorities change. But if you are somebody that is always wanting to go out and always wanting to, party and you are super extroverted and that is kind of your vibe and that's your personality, that is unlikely to change. Now, you can make behavioral changes and, not do that because you are because other things are more important. But in terms of the personality type of somebody who wants to do that, then that is pretty stable. And so generally, when you meet somebody and you have a difference in a tendency to go out or want to stay in, this is something that to pay attention to. This is a potential incompatibility over time if you are constantly trying to work out an arrangement that you're both happy with. Some things are more seamless if both of you like to go out or both of you like to stay in. And this type of thing is something that is unlikely to fundamentally change over time. Although, again, of course, in therapy or in couples therapy, if you're talking about what's important to your partner and you are really trying to want to make changes in your life and your relationship, then yeah, of course you can say, I'm coming home early because this is important to my partner. And if you understand on a fundamental level why that is important to them, then you can change. But again, you have to want to do that. And that is a really important factor here. So, another example of it is, how someone, keeps their house and neatness or messiness. This is also something that doesn't totally change fundamentally over time. You can make compromises, and you can change the behavior. But generally, if you are dating somebody and, you see their home and you do not like the way that they keep their home, this is something to keep in mind. This is an example. Another example I see a lot is sex. A lot of people will think that once people get married, their partner will be more open-minded, will have a higher sex drive, will be more into sex. This is also not true. If you meet somebody and they are not super about it, their sex drive is not all that high, they're not really open to talking about it, they are not really open to exploring things that you want to try, this is not going to change just because you get married and you all of a sudden, are sort of committed to the relationship. And by the extension, you are going to become, somebody who is super into sex. That doesn't happen. So if you are listening to this and that is something that is important to you and you're with somebody that is not really like that, then you have to ask yourself, is this something, are there other things about this? Like, how important is this to you? If nothing ever changed, would you still want to be with this person? Would you still love the person and want to be with them? And that is actually really the fundamental question here about thinking about a future with someone is, if this person does not change, if nothing in this relationship changes, is that okay? Am I still going to love them and want to be with them for who they are? Neurotype is something that also is not going to change over time. If somebody has ADHD or is on the autism spectrum, that's not going to change. However, the understanding of that and the sort of learning, tools and skills to address those maybe incompatibilities. I mean, this could be a whole other episode, but I see a lot of pairing of neurotype, different neurotype pairing. So somebody who is neurotypical versus with somebody who is not neurotypical. And this is a big difference between each individual. And those things are not going to change, but you can understand each other. You can learn to understand both operating systems and to accept that and to work within that. So I mean, you can't really change without acceptance first. You have to really understand who you are, how you operate, how you show up, and then with that understanding, then you can kind of make some changes if that is important to you. And by changes, I mean, you can set up things in your life that can help you, be more organized or be on time or something like that if that's something that is important to your partner. You can do that, but the desire to do it has to be pretty high because these are tough things. These are sort of tough ways to change. And so the drive has to really be there. But if the drive is really there, then, there's lots of things that can change. You can change you can change your behavior. You can have new interests. You can be open minded. You can explore new things. And then you change as a result of experiences. And this is why, so many people change after relationships that don't work out because they sort of take more time to understand themselves, to figure themselves out, and they learn new things that they were into. They learn to be more understanding of themselves and then direct with prospective partners and dates. And so they can really, they have a different sort of understanding of themselves. And so, a lot of people will kind of come in and they'll also look at their ex partner's new relationship, and they'll say, "This is why they were never like this with me, but they're like this with their new partner. I was always asking for them to do X, Y, Z, and they never did for me, but now they are." I mean, this is a complicated topic, but the dynamic of the two is very relevant to that. But also, it's possible that someone it wants to do things differently because the first relationship didn't work out. So they want, or second or third or whatever it is. So, they don't want to keep repeating the same pattern. So they are different. They show up differently in the next relationship. And oftentimes, as of course I talk about a lot with my clients and just in general, the time after divorce or separation is a really important window for change, can be a really important window for change. But of course, oftentimes there is motivation for that not to happen. So people can change, but people have to really want to. So it's like the predictors of people that are successful in therapy or couples therapy are really people that are open minded to understanding themselves, to understanding their partner. You know, resentments need to be worked on. Obviously, communication, sex and intimacy is a big part. So these are all things that can change, in therapy or coaching, and relationships can be different. But again, the desire really has to be there. And so, these are things that I talk about with my clients all the time. Another big one is addiction, substance use, drinking, gambling, porn, all these things. If this is something that is present in the beginning of a relationship and you are considering spending your life with someone, this is really something to think about. And if you are okay with it being the way that it is, for the rest of your life and for the rest of the relationship, then okay. But if you are saying, oh, well, they'll stop once we're married, they'll stop once we have kids, you need to really think about that. Can people treat their addiction? Of course they can. But again, the motivation really has to be there in order to do that. And of course, I believe that people can change because that is my job, to help people understand themselves and to help them change in key areas that are going to make their lives better and their relationships better. But ultimately, you know, a big part of my work with people is also accepting who they are fundamentally and looking at the past and looking at patterns and looking at examples of relationships and really, you know, just having that deep understanding and acceptance of who they are. And then, you can decide how things are working for you. But it also is sort of a paradox because people come to couples therapy expecting change, but really the first step is acceptance, accepting each other and really knowing and understanding each other. And then we can see what happens as a result of that. So, you know, these are questions that I answer with my clients. And so I thought I would just do, a shorter episode on this topic because it is an important one. And again, you cannot force anybody to change. And so if you are somebody who is wanting to come to couples therapy, wanting a lot of things to be different with your partner, I also encourage you to come to individual therapy or coaching or something like that, where you can really understand what is important to you. And, if things are going to be a certain way in this, in your relationship, and you can change and you can look at things differently and you can engage differently with your partner. And then the relationship can change as a result. But if you are wanting to send your partner to therapy and they're not going, or you want to go to couples therapy and they refuse, you can still change a lot yourself. If you come and you understand and you have somebody who can help you take your partner's perspective and can help you look at things differently and do things differently, then the relationship can change. It is not a fact that, you know, that your partner needs to be fixed and your partner is the problem. It just never works like that. So if you are coming into therapy with that mindset, it's not going to work out so well for you but again, you can change. If you want the relationship to change, you can change. And if you are resentful that it seems to you that you are the one doing the work and you are the one that is only open to changing, then that also is a conversation, of course, with a therapist, or for you to think about yourself and then, try to figure out where to go from there. But the takeaway from this is that if you are thinking about dating somebody, if you're dating somebody, if you're in a relationship with somebody and there are a lot of things about them that you do not like, that you wish were different, even small mannerisms that, really bother you, that person is who they are. Those kinds of things are not going to change, but you can change your view of it. You could change your relationship with that person. You can change your perspective, and you can, look at the positives and look at the bigger picture. And, of course, again, therapy can help with that. But, oftentimes people show up as they are, and you cannot expect that once things get serious, once you get married, that your partner is going to be different, that they're going to come home from work early, that they're going to stop drinking, that they're going to, be neater or more organized, or they're going to be on time, or, they're going to be open-minded about travel or sex or religion or whatever it is that is important to you. So keep in mind this paradox of, if this person didn't change anything, would you still love them and want to be with them as they are right now in this moment? And then also remember that everything changes over time. Experience changes, perspective changes, priorities change. You change as a result of things happening to you. And biology, again, like I mentioned before, of course, you change in many ways over time. So this is the thing that is hard for people to wrap their minds around. But those are the important takeaways. So I just thought I would talk for a little bit about something that I talk to my clients on an individual basis about. And so remember the joke, the light bulb has to want to change. So of course, many things are possible with that. Of course, I have seen depression abate, anxiety abate, addiction abate, all kinds of things, with the desire, and then seeing change happen is very motivating, and seeing the sort of feeling the reward and the reinforcement of doing things differently is also motivating. But are you going to have a total personality overhaul? No. And so that is something to keep in mind. So if you, again, are with somebody who, you're out with them and you don't like how they act around your friends, you don't like how they act around your family, you don't like the things they say, you're sort of embarrassed by them, that kind of thing is something that is unlikely to change. So these are just things to think about. Thank you for listening. Of course, if you have questions, let me know. Comments, I'd love to hear from you. This has been Talk Relationship to Me, produced by Peach Island Productions. I'm Dr. Elana Hoffman. Do you have a question about relationships? I'd love to hear from you. You can go to my website, drelanahoffman.com, and click contact, or find me on Instagram at dr.elanahoffman. You can find all the info you need, including more about today's episode, in the show description. And if you have questions or comments about today's episode, I'd love to hear from you. You can inspire a podcast topic. Thank you so much for listening.